The year is 1845. A heavy iron gate creaks open, revealing a massive stone structure looming through the fog. This is the State Lunatic Asylum. To the outside world, it is a place of healing, a modern marvel of Victorian science. But inside, the air is thick with the smell of damp stone, unwashed bodies, and despair. The walls are 3 feet thick, designed to keep the screams from reaching the nearby town. In the basement, there is a room that doesn't appear on blueprints, a room filled with wooden boxes. For decades, rumors swirled about what happened to the patients who disappeared during the night. Then, a century later, during a renovation of the old asylum grounds, construction crews made a bone-chilling discovery. They found a secret cemetery, but it wasn't the number of graves that horrified them. It was the positions of the skeletons. Some were face down. Others had their fingers curled into the wood of their coffins, their nail marks still visible in the rotted oak. They weren't just dead when they were put in the ground, they were breathing. This is the story of the 1800s asylum, where the treatment was often a living nightmare, and where patients were buried alive. To understand how this could happen, you have to understand what it meant to be insane in the 19th century. In the 1800s, there were no brain scans. There were no blood tests. If you were depressed, you were melancholic. If you were an independent woman who refused to obey your husband, you were hysterical. If you had a seizure, you were possessed or feeble-minded. Once you were committed to an asylum, you lost your legal rights. You were no longer a person, you were a ward. The stakes were absolute. There was no release date. The doctors had total power over your body and your life. And in an era before modern stethoscopes, the line was thin. In the overcrowded, understaffed wards of the Victorian era, a patient who fell into a deep catatonic sleep or a diabetic coma was often given a cursory glance by a tired orderly and pronounced dead in a rush to clear out the beds. Early in the 1800s, there was a movement called moral management. The idea was that asylums should be peaceful, farm-like retreats where patients could find their sanity through hard work and fresh air. But these retreats turned into warehouses. Facilities built for 200 people were suddenly cramming in 2,000. To maintain order, the doctors turned to therapies that were actually forms of torture. There was the tranquilizer chair, where a patient was strapped down for days. There was also the Utica crib, a shallow wooden cage where patients were locked overnight, unable to sit up or turn over. These treatments didn't cure the mind, they broke the body. Many patients fell into states of extreme shock or apparent death. In a dark, crowded ward, a patient in this state looked like a corpse, and the orderlies, desperate to keep the death rate low on paper, would often move these bodies to the potter's field under the cover of darkness to make room. The fear of being buried alive, known as tapophobia, was a genuine epidemic in the 1800s. It wasn't just a campfire story, it was a common medical concern. Famed writers like Edgar Allan Poe wrote obsessively about it because it happened. Medical journals of the time are filled with accounts of corpses waking up during their own wakes or scratching at the inside of their coffins. But in an asylum, you didn't have a family to sit with your body for 3 days to make sure. You didn't have a priest to say a long prayer. You were a number. If the doctor said you were dead, you were dead. Because the asylums were often self-sustaining, they had their own wood shops, where patients built coffins for other patients. The system was efficient, too efficient. A patient could die at 2 p.m. and be 6 feet under by sunset, leaving no time for the apparent death to wear off before the dirt was piled high on top of the wooden lid. Telling a story this dark requires a specific kind of soundscape, one that feels cold, heavy, and claustrophobic. That's why I rely on epidemic sound. To build the tension of those long, silent asylum hallways, I use their dark ambient category. I look for tracks with low-frequency drones and the sound of distant, echoing footsteps. When you're creating content about history or true crime, the right sound can make the difference between a viewer clicking away and being immersed. Epidemic sound gives me unlimited access to 40,000 tracks and 90,000 sound effects. Everything from the clink of a 19th century medical tray to the heavy thud of a wooden lid closing. Because they own all the rights, I never worry about strikes. If you want to take your storytelling to the next level, you need a professional audio library. Check the link in the description for a free trial. Now, let's look at the evidence left behind in the dirt that confirms our worst fears. One of the most famous examples of this horror comes from the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. This massive stone structure was designed to be a palace for the insane, but it quickly became a dungeon of horrors for thousands. During its operation, thousands of people died within its walls. When researchers began looking into the Potter's Field, the unmarked cemetery for the poor and the forgotten, they found disturbing discrepancies in the old burial records. Old records showed that some bodies were delivered to the morgue while they were still warm. In some cases, the safety coffins of the era, which featured bells on the surface connected by a string to the hand of the deceased, were used. But in an asylum, who was listening for the bell? The graveyard was located far from the main building. If a patient woke up in the middle of the night, 3 feet underground, and pulled that string, only the cold wind would hear it. But there was another reason why patients were buried so quickly, and why they might have been helped into their graves. In the 1800s, medical schools were desperate for cadavers to study anatomy, but it was illegal to buy bodies. This created a black market of body snatchers or resurrectionists. Asylums were a gold mine for these grave robbers. Nobody cared about a lunatic. Nobody was coming to visit their grave. Some historians believe that corrupt officials were involved. They would intentionally declare patients dead, bury them in shallow, unmarked graves, and then sell the location to body snatchers that same night. Imagine waking up not in a hospital bed, but on a cold stone table in a theater. Surrounded by students with scalpels, you realize you are the lesson. To the students, you were just a fresh specimen. To the asylum, you were just another natural causes statistic that helped balance the books for the month. If you visit these old asylum grounds today, you won't see many names. You will see rows and rows of small square stones with nothing but a number carved into them. Patient 402, patient 1118. These stones are the final insult to a life. But for some, the suffering didn't end when the pulse stopped. In the 1970s, at the site of a former asylum in the Midwest, workers moving a cemetery found a coffin that had been disturbed from the inside by its terrified occupant. The skeleton's skull was turned to the side, and the hands were clenched so tightly they had shattered the small bones of the fingers against the lid. The medical records for that number listed the cause of death as exhaustion. The reality was far more gruesome. They were exhausted from screaming into the earth and clawing at the wood until their fingers gave out. It is a level of suffering that the official records were designed to hide from the public forever. Eventually, the asylum era came to an end. The invention of the stethoscope, the discovery of modern sedatives, and the rise of patient rights meant that apparent death was no longer a death sentence for the vulnerable. But the ghosts of those who were buried before their time still haunt our history. Today, many of these old asylums are tourist attractions or haunted landmarks. People walk through the hallways looking for something supernatural. But the real horror isn't supernatural. It is the cold, clinical indifference of a system that decided some people were better off dead and didn't bother to check if they were actually gone before the first shovelful of dirt hit the wood. The marks on the inside of those coffins aren't just signs of a struggle for breath. They are signs of a struggle for recognition. A final, desperate attempt to say, I am still here, I am still alive. It is a reminder of how we treat the other. When we strip people of their humanity, when we hide them behind thick stone walls and give them numbers instead of names, we make it easy for the unthinkable to happen. Being buried alive is the ultimate fear we all share. Next time you pass an old, abandoned hospital or a field of numbered stones, listen closely. Because the history of medicine isn't just a story of progress, it's a story written in the scratches on the underside of a rotted coffin lid. It's a story of those who were silenced before they had finished speaking. And it's a warning that the line between the sane world and the mad world is often just 6 feet of dirt and a doctor's signature on a piece of paper.